She entered the room with slow steps and left the entire family in absolute silence. Nobody understood. Nobody expected it. Nobody prepared. On that cloudy late afternoon, with the sky threatening rain and time standing still like a clock without a winding, a frail-looking woman appeared at the main entrance of a mansion surrounded by high walls and automatic gates. The scene seemed out of place, as if someone had cut a character from another reality and pasted it luxury and ostentation. She wore simple clothing, a long, worn skirt, a hand-embroidered blouse, a flowered scarf wrapped around her carefully combed gray hair. She carried only a small cloth bag in her hands. There was no jewelry, no expensive perfume, no arrogance, only dignity. Dignity, that word that around there seemed to have already been forgotten. The mansion's door opened reluctantly. The lady took her steps slowly, firmly, as if unhurried because she carried decades on her shoulders in her heart. Each step echoed against the cold marble of the entrance, and every look she received was like a sharp blade of silent judgment. Inside, the atmosphere was different. Laughter, clinking bowls, a sophisticated aroma of dishes that weren't always savored, but displayed, a family gathering. The elite gathered to celebrate the growth of an empire built with sweat, but forgotten in its origins. As they saw her walk through the door, the smiles faded. The laughter turned to whispers. "Who let that woman in?" murmured a young woman with dark glasses and a sick look even inside the house. "Is she lost?" asked the youngest son, laughing mockingly. The patriarch, seated at the head of the long oak table, hadn't yet noticed. He was reading something old, documents, black and white photos, records of the beginning of everything, nostalgia, memory, history. But the lady's eyes didn't waver in the face of hostility. She knew every corner of that house well, even if no one there knew it. And every face seemed like a shadow of the past. Grandchildren she never knew, daughters-in-law she never saw, smiles she never received. That's when the silence spread. The patriarch, when he looked up and saw the woman before him, turned pale. His hands were shaking. His chin was wobbly. The memory struck like a flash of lightning in the darkness. This was no stranger. It was a buried name, a faded face, a story many preferred to forget, but which never ceased to exist. She stood before him, firm, serene, as if time had no power to erase her, and he just said, "Good afternoon, Roberto." Roberto Montes, the great entrepreneur, the founder of Montes Tech, the man admired by thousands, now reduced to the boy who once reached out to this same woman decades ago, asking for help getting started. No one understood why he got up so quickly. No one understood why his eyes filled with tears. But in that instant, the empire trembled. Walked through the front door. Why, the truth had just... It wasn't an invasion. It wasn't a revenge scene. It was a reunion between past and present, between ingratitude and remembrance, between power and origin. And her, she just smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't bow, doesn't apologize, and doesn't explain itself. Because those who know their own worth don't need to shout. They just need to show up. That afternoon, the mansion that so symbolized power and status became just a stage. The protagonist of the most impactful act that family had ever witnessed. Mrs. Lords was 83 years old, but she wasn't the kind of old woman you'd pity. There was something about her, an invisible, almost sacred steadfastness. She walked slowly, yes, but each step seemed to have purpose. There was no need to raise his voice. There was no need to justify his presence. She was the kind of woman who had seen the world turned upside down and was still standing. She wore simple, well-kept, an ankle-length navy blue skirt, a hand-starched white cotton blouse, and a flowery scarf tied around her neck, the kind of scarf that harkened back to another era, another time. In her eyes, a calm glow of someone who has cried her heart out but never lost faith in life. The afternoon was sultry. A pale sun hung over the city's most upscale neighborhood. The cars passing by the Montez Mansion street were silent, electric, with tinted windows and personalized license plates. Lords got off the bus at the corner, a small cloth bag over her shoulder. She carried documents, a small notebook with references to previous jobs, and a yellowed photo folded between the pages. When he arrived at the mansion's imposing gate, he didn't hesitate. He rang the doorbell and waited. "Yes?" A dry voice answered over the intercom. "Good afternoon. I came for the job interview. Name? Lords. Lords Almeida." Silence. 3 seconds later, the gate opened with a metallic clang. She came in. The first thing you noticed about that house was the excess. Everything was big, exaggerated, too immaculate. There were marble sculptures imported from Italy, $1,000 rugs, and a polished wooden staircase that wound up to the second floor as if trying to touch the crystal ceiling. But there was something cold about that place, something empty. The beauty was from a catalog, the smiles rehearsed, and people unattainable. Mrs. Lords was greeted by a blonde woman wearing high heels and dark lipstick. She looked her visitor up and down with a mixture of strangeness and judgment. "Did you come to the interview, housekeeper?" Sure. Hope you have." He pointed with his chin to a corner of the room near the service door without even offering water. Lords nodded with a slight smile. While waiting, I discreetly observed the activity in the house. It was family gathering day. There were children, grandchildren, friends, all dressed in designer clothes, talking loudly, laughing forcefully, taking pictures with their cell phones as if they were in a margarine commercial. But none of them looked at Lords as if she were human. She was invisible. 2 teenagers passed by whispering, holding back laughter. "Does she know how to use a robot vacuum cleaner? Man, he looks like one of those people who sell dish towels at the fair," and they continued laughing. Lords pretended not to hear. Another woman, appearing to be the wife of the eldest heir, passed by her and gave her a sharp look. I don't understand why they hire these old people. They're so slow. With each comment, Lords seemed even more serene, as if she had heard every form of disguised cruelty throughout her life, and yet remained unmoved. And there was a reason for that. She's been there before, on that very ground, in that same room, decades ago, but nobody knew that. The Montez family was famous for their billion-dollar empire. Montez Tech, technology, communications, and innovation company that spanned the country. The patriarch, Roberto Montez, was recognized as a visionary genius, a magazine cover star, and an inspiration for generations. But there was something the magazines never told, something the newspapers didn't know, and Lords knew everything, because part of the origin of that fortune came from her. The first equipment, the first idea, the first recordings. She wasn't there by chance. That visit, that was interview, more than it seemed. But at that moment, no one there imagined it. And perhaps precisely for that reason, each look of contempt was like a confirmation that time really does erase what is not remembered. Or almost. Lourdes looked at the house with the nostalgia of someone who had once owned it. The painting on the wall of the main living room, she'd seen it when it was bought at a bargain auction before the company was successful. The armchair in the corner, she'd chosen it. The company. Name? Perhaps the most painful part. She helped create it. But there she was, being treated like just another person, as if she didn't matter, as if her story was worthless. And yet there was no anger in his eyes. There was purpose. There was something in store, something that was yet to come. The interview hadn't even started, but the real story, it was about to be revealed. And when it is, nothing in that house will be the same again. The sun was already illuminating the immaculate of the Montez mansion when the breakfast table was set with exaggeration and precision. Imported porcelain dishes, exotic fruit juices, French cheeses, artisanal breads, all displayed with the coldness of someone no longer enchanted by the taste of life. Lourdes, discreet, stood near the kitchen entrance, awaiting instructions. She was there simply as a candidate for the cleaning job, though, in her silence, she already knew every corner of the house, better than anyone else present. That's when he saw her, Donna Helena Montez, elegant, with a slightly upturned nose and a sharp gaze. She was the current matriarch of the family, and also the woman who, decades earlier, had been part of a cruel scheme that would change Lourdes's fate forever. But she didn't say anything. He just approached, gently, as if he just wanted to break the ice. "Good morning, madam. The table looks beautiful. Congratulations on the house." Donna Helena looked up slowly, as if she had been interrupted by an annoying noise, and he replied with silence, just an icy stare, an expression that said more than any words. "You don't belong here." Lourdes, with a slight smile that mixed compassion and restrained irony, simply nodded and walked away. It wasn't the first time she'd been treated as invisible, but perhaps it would be one of the last. Across the table, the teenage grandchildren whispered and laughed. One of them commented loudly, without the slightest shame, "These old women come to beg, I bet they don't even know how to use a broom." The sentence cut through the air. There was muffled laughter, complicit looks, poisonous smiles. But Lourdes, she was unmoved. He simply responded with a gentle smile, the kind of smile that, if observed closely, carried centuries of stories, swallowed pain and silent victories. But then, the unexpected. In the next room, the patriarch, Senior Roberto Montez, he was rummaging through an old box of files with his eldest grandson. It was a rare intergenerational connection. He showed them the company's earliest records, blueprints, old logos, handwritten contracts. "It all started with little," he said, "in a rented warehouse with repurposed furniture and a huge dream." The grandson, curious, pulled out a dusty picture frame. "Who are these people here?" The old man choked, his eyes fixed on the image, a black and white photograph, slightly faded. 3 people in front of a shed. One of them was him, young, with a hopeful expression. The second figure, a man who had already passed away. And the third, it was Lourdes, dressed almost the same as today, with the same scarf, with the same look. Time seemed to stop. With the frame trembling in his hands, Roberto stood, crossed the room, and entered the breakfast area. The conversation ceased. Everyone turned around, confused. He held up the photo. The silence was absolute. "Where did you get that from?" he asked, almost in a whisper, with a mixture of fear and longing in his eyes. Lords, still standing, observed everything serenely. And then, for the first time, he spoke with a voice both firm and soft. "This photo was taken in the first warehouse. I was next to you. Remember, Roberto?" The impact was immediate. The name, a voice, the memory. Roberto staggered back slightly. The grandchildren stopped laughing. Donna Helena turned pale. Time froze there. The woman everyone had ignored. The woman who had been judged, ridiculed, underestimated. It was, in fact, part of the origin of everything. The empire that supported that family was named after Roberto, but it was in the hands of lords. And it was at that moment that the ground began to give way. The masks, which had been firm until then, began to bite. The looks, once haughty, now wavered. And lords, silent, had made more noise than everyone in that room combined. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with that of freshly baked bread, perfectly cut fruit, and light, woody scent that filled the hallways of the Montez mansion. It was an ordinary morning for this unusual family. Gathered around the immense imported mahogany table, the family members discussed investments, travel, parties, and promotions. All except one. Lourdes stood there, at the edge of the table, her hands clasped in front of her and a patient look in her eyes. She waited for someone to say something. Maybe an invitation to sit down. Maybe a genuine good morning. But what came tried to get closer to Donna Helena, wife of Patriarch Roberto Montez. She wore impeccable clothes, discreet but expensive necklaces, and that look that classified people in seconds as if assessing the price behind the curtain. Lourdes, with her gentle tone, tried to make conversation. "Sorry to intrude, madam, but your china is beautiful. It reminds me a lot of one my grandmother brought from Europe a long time ago." Donna Helena looked up from her cup, analyzed Lourdes as if she were evaluating an insect on the window pane, and then looked away without saying a word. Dry silence. Superior gaze. Sharp indifference. On the other side of the table, they August Son listened, and he didn't miss the chance to show off to his cousins, in a loud and mocking tone. "These old women come here just to beg. I bet they don't even know how to use a broom." The grandchildren's laughter echoed like a wave of barely concealed malice. But Lourdes, she didn't react. Smiled. He just smiled light, almost maternal, was more powerful than any answer. It wasn't the smile of someone who accepts humiliation. It was the smile of someone who knows much more than they appear, from someone who has seen that kind of people, born, grow up and disappear, and then the moment that would change everything. In the library, a room with natural light and floor-to-ceiling wooden bookshelves, Roberto Montes showed his eldest grandson a treasure chest of company memories, old. Records, technical drawings, photos from Montez Tech's early years. It all started here, when we had nothing but courage. "And some good people by our side," he said, nostalgically. The grandson pulled out a picture frame that was leaning against the bottom of the box. It was an old photo, in black and white. It showed 3 people smiling in front of a modest shed. The grandson recognized 2 faces. His grandfather, younger, and a man who had already passed away, a former partner. Third face. It was her, Lourdes, With the same flowery scarf, the same look, the same calm demeanor, Roberto was paralyzed. He took the photo with trembling hands and stared at it as if the past had come back to bite him. He stood up suddenly, crossed the corridor with hurried steps, and entered the coffee room, interrupting the conversation. Everyone turned to him, wondering at his expression. He lifted the frame, his voice breaking. "Where did you get that from?" Silence, Lords still. "Standing with the calm that only those who know time can carry," replied softly. "This photo was taken in the first warehouse. I was next to you, remember, Roberto?" For a moment the world stopped. The Montez family patriarch paled. The laughter stopped. The grandchildren, previously mocking, looked at each other in confusion. Donna Helena, for the first time, lost her composure. The woman they ignored, who despised, who mocked. She was in that photo as one of the founders of Montez Tech, a ghost from the past? No, a root that no one wanted to water, but that remained alive, firm, and now appeared before them. The billion-dollar empire that supported every inch of that mansion had the touch and history of Lords stamped on its origin. And the most surprising thing, she didn't seem interested in accusing. He didn't scream, didn't demand. It was there to remember. Remember that behind every fortune there is an origin, and there are truths that they try no matter to bury, how much, always return to the surface. For a long second no one breathed. Lord's name had echoed in the air like a forgotten curse, or perhaps like a buried truth, the kind that the powerful prefer to pretend never existed. Everyone looked at each other, confused, nervous, trying to understand what was happening. Senior Roberto Montez, until then the pillar of the family, was immobile. Her teary eyes couldn't tear themselves away from the photograph. The frame trembled between his fingers as if bearing the weight of a past he had never had the courage to face. He knew that face. He knew that woman. I knew Lord's, not as a day laborer, not as a visitor, but how fundamental part of its history. More than 40 years had passed since he had last seen her, 40 years since she was removed. Not by accident, not because of disagreement, but by strategy, silent, free, calculated. At the time, Roberto was enchanted by Helena for sharing power, wife, and Helena, not even with a woman, saw much no less with a simple, experienced, and visionary woman like Lord's. It was then that the trap was set. A subtle legal dispute disguised as restructuring, modified documents, meetings canceled, removals justified by management incompatibilities. Lord's, despite everything, never fought publicly. It didn't make headlines, didn't expose anyone. It disappeared. And now he was there, in front of everyone, that had already seen the same firm and the calm gaze. A look that morning was impossible to ignore. Donna Helena, sitting at the end of the table, tried to maintain her pose. But his expression no longer held its veneer. She was pale, disconcerted, trying at all costs to hide her discomfort. Lord's, It was all so long ago, he murmured, trying to regain control. But Lord's didn't need to raise her voice. She just stared at her, with the strength of someone who knows the peace of mind of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. And he said, with a firmness that cut through the air, "I didn't come for money. I came to see if you taught your children about gratitude." Silence. The phrase hung suspended in the air, as if it had been carved into the mansion's ceiling. Those words, simple and direct, carried more weight than any lawsuit, than any corporate speech. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't a charge. It was just living memory. And in that moment, each of those present felt, even without fully understanding, that they were facing something much greater than themselves. The grandchildren who had been mocking before were now silent, their faces downcast. The youngest son, who had made fun of the lady, looked away, not daring to look at her. Donna Helena tried to compose herself, but the truth is that no amount of makeup could hide the weight of her shame. Roberto, the patriarch, finally spoke, with a hoarse, broken, almost regretful voice. "Lords, I'm sorry. I should have fought for you." She just looked at him. Not even anger, no mercy, just true. "You didn't fight, but you're alive. You can do something now, and perhaps this is Lord's greatest strength." She didn't need to destroy anyone. She just needed to remind them of who she was. Not with shouting, but with presence, with dignity, with the certainty that, no matter how much time passes, the truth always finds a way. When Lords to return, stood up, silence still hung in the air in the face of the grandeur of his presence. The faces once haughty were now bowed, some in shame, some in regret, and many in astonishment. She passed slowly over each gaze, unhurriedly, as if leaving a mark on them that could never be erased. He stopped near the door, turned around one last time, and in a firm voice said, "The true value of a family lies in respect, and that no amount of money can buy." There was no anger. There was only no rematch, a truth that no luxury carpet could hide, a truth that transcended decades of silence and convenience. Roberto tried to get closer. She said she wanted it back, that the house was hers too, that there was room. But Lords just looked at him with kindness and pain mixed together. "I don't want the space that was denied to me. I just wanted you guys to know that I've been here from the beginning. And even though they erased me from the wall, they couldn't erase me from history." And then Lords was gone, without signing anything, without demanding anything, without taking anything other than your dignity. Days later, something unexpected happened. A new sign has been discreetly placed on the glass facade of Montez Tech's headquarters. Just below the main founder's name, a new name shown in sober letters. Founded by Roberto Montez and Lords Almeida. For many, it was just a historical correction. For others, a symbolic gesture. But for her, the eldest grandson, touched by the story, began to look for records. He researched old documents, spoke with former employees, and delved into the company's past. And the more I read, the more I admired it. I didn't understand how someone like Lords had been left aside for so long. But now he knew, and he promised never to forget. Perhaps Lords never wanted revenge. Maybe he never wanted public recognition, nor status, nor medals. Maybe she just wanted one simple thing, to be respected. And on that silent afternoon, before a table full of heirs, she achieved something that no amount of money in the world could buy, the truth restored. And here, perhaps, lies the true reflection of this story. How many people have passed through your life and been unfairly left aside? How many names have been forgotten, even though they were an essential part of what you built? How many times has pride spoken louder than gratitude? Lords didn't slam doors. She opened a window to what really matters. And in the end, perhaps this is the greatest legacy one can leave. Not what you have, but who you honor.